你好，你们这肮脏的蒙古人，我是蒙面人族高古人，我来这里是为了通知你们，我们中国人正在机会，你可以跟去民主党，让他们去批路线自己，有家嘟嘟鲁放，我想就fin sweet事情。So after an hour of attempting to do that intro and butchering the Chinese language, this video actually presents a very similar challenge to the One Piece one. And really when talking about any sort of series that is that long and ongoing, is how do I want to break this apart and how do I want to go about it? I think this will just be sort of my general thoughts, as a lot of you are familiar with my feelings towards Kingdom up to a certain point. But now, after 3 years, I've finally caught up and pushed through all the way. A lot of my feelings are similar to how they were before, and in fact it held up. And that was one of my worries when going back to it and reading it from the start again, was whether or not I would like the series as much as I did 3 years ago. And so here we are, over 3 years later, and 200 plus manga read, pretty much, and I still hold to the opinion that Kingdom has one of the best starts I've ever read. It's a great way of really getting you into the world and everything that's going on, but not overwhelming you with it all at once. The initial arc introduces us to the main character, Shin, who's an easy character to really get behind. He's someone who throughout the story, through different trials and tribulations, we see have to overcome, but I think a really good thing that Kingdom does is give him plenty of setbacks, so that every sort of step he takes towards his grander goal, which is to be a great general under the heavens, feels really earned and deserved. And since Kingdom is a war series that tackles it on every levels, it's very important to establish well the concept of wins and losses, because if not, then every sort of confrontation Shin goes to, we automatically assume he's going to win, when throughout the story that isn't always the case. Even though we know he's going to eventually come out triumphant in the end, it does a really good job of grasping you and really keeping you immersed in that. I think this is really well contrasted with a character like Sei, who has a lot of mystery to him, and as the story goes on, we end up getting more of who he is and his past, which I think added tremendously to the characters, making him one of my favorites. And so the first arc of the story of them attempting to help Sei regain his throne does an amazing job of getting us familiar with the most vital characters in the series, although some of them are yet to be shown. Does a great job of getting us familiar with the home base of Chin before expanding on the world and therefore not overwhelming us with all of these different characters and places. Now, this isn't unique to Kingdom. A lot of long ongoing series do this and do this well, introducing a character who you wonder how they're going to play a role within the story, and then they absolutely blow by any sort of expectations you have. Characters like General Oki, Osen, Hoken, Riboku are all great examples of the importance of establishing characters like this. It does a great job of setting a bar for our main character Shin and what he needs to strive towards, but also Kingdom is very patient at times with the execution of these characters, hence why the series has been as long as it is, as I think there is this overall conflict happening in the ultimate goal, which is to unify China, and the author has done an amazing job of laying out these characters and bringing them into the fray when appropriate. As well as giving them proper payoffs and making their characters feel more than just obstacles. And that's another thing, throughout this sort of method of sort of layering these characters in throughout the story and having their payoffs, the story shows us different sides of the kingdom. Even some of the more morally reprehensible characters, the series does a good job of at least giving them some sort of justification for why they are. And even though there is this larger thing happening, it's all of these interpersonal battles that are happening within the larger war that really makes this series stand out. It's all really layered. For example, you have Shin in his own personal goal. You have Oki in his own personal problems with Hoken. You have Kanki in his own personal way of going about treating the world. Riboku in his own goals. Sei in his own goals. All of these characters each have their own wars, and as well as it doesn't only do it on the battlefield, but in the political area as well, as there's even an issue within Shin in making sure that Sei is able to keep control of his throne and not lose it to other people within that sort of state that want to take over. And what's extremely impressive is that it does all of this without ever really feeling like it's losing momentum. It feels like we have this incredibly character-driven sort of thing within a plot-driven narrative. And so many times, in order to compensate for wanting to focus on the world and all of these different moving parts, you have to resort to having far and few character moments and really delving into these characters. But I think Kingdom has a really good balance of not only with backstories, but also throughout the story seeing these characters grow, their dialogue being very showing of how their characters are and what they have to go through, and having their resolves tested on many different levels, say within the political realm and his goal to unify China and the nature of humanity. And so Kingdom does a really good job of addressing all of this type of stuff. And a character like Hyokai is the perfect example of the story choosing and knowing when to pull away from this larger thing to tackle a more personal issue and battle within a character. as well as Kingdom, I think overall just understands the nature of war, as we see people within the state of Qin even be incredibly twisted and evil. Kanki is one of my favorite, if I'm pronouncing his name properly, is one of my favorite characters in the entire series because he shows that war isn't black and white. It isn't good guys against bad guys. It's gray and red. Everyone who participates in war can be held accountable for some sort of misdeed and evil. I guess there are just a lot of questions on how much is okay and how much is enough or acceptable when pursuing a greater goal in what you think to be the greater good. And again, this goes back to Sei and the philosophy of his character and the nature of humanity, whether or not humans are naturally dark or light, and Shin's philosophy that humans' nature is fire. The world of Kingdom and the way that the series goes about presenting us the characters in the world is extremely well done, showing it to us in all different types of levels, be it present or past as well. I guess now, before it's too late, would be a good time to talk about the Coalition arc, right? It spans around 100 chapters, a pretty extensive, long arc, although nowhere near the longest in the series. We'll get to that later. And I think Coalition arc is easy to love. It's the ultimate underdog thing. All of the odds are stacked against Qin, and it feels like there's no way for them to overcome. And throughout all of the different battles, and as much as we see Shin himself grow through this arc specifically, I mean, how could you not love it? It's filled with so many amazing, memorable moments for the characters within this arc. And again, just the overall premise of the arc itself creates the ultimate amount of tension within the series that I think since then has not been replicated. I seriously don't know how you get more tense than, oh crap, we're actually doomed this time. Everyone's against us. This giant army of allies has turned against us and it's over. So since then, I think it's been a bit difficult to replicate the actual, I guess, hype maybe people have when reading Coalition. Although I don't feel as if the Coalition stands out greatly from the rest of the series, in the sense that even though, yes, I would argue it's the best arc in the entire series, I think the series before and even moments after, although in different ways, provide so many important and well-done moments. And I think one of the aspects of Coalition that might not get talked about often is not only the actual conflict going on, but the vast amount of characters, as I alluded to earlier, that get introduced at this point, but we don't really see their payoffs at all. And here I also want to direct my attention towards Hoken a little bit, because he's going to get brought up later, the one responsible for killing General Oki. It serves, I think, as really a benchmark for how far Shin has improved and gone far in terms of his strength and resolve as a character. And every time Hoken shows up, we see Shin tested and how far he's progressed more and more and more. Just wanted to throw that out there. And so even though this is true for most of Kingdom, in this arc specifically, I think the entire point of a person's sort of willpower and the ability to lead other men is greatly shown here in midst of all of the different tactical things, as I think some of the later encounters are a little more focused on tactics, as we also start to get more of some of the characters that have been introduced or pushed further in this arc. But I think Coalition as a whole did an amazing job of showing the different qualities of leadership and being a leader of men and the incredible burden that that takes and how not everyone's really built up for it, and testing Shin to see whether he's made for this sort of thing. And this is a small thing, but it's something I appreciate nonetheless, and it's Kingdom being very well timed with its comedy. It's a series that knows when to be serious and when to understand the severity of the moment, and it understands that the more lighthearted nature of things should be more reserved for when there's downtime. The friendly camaraderie between the soldiers and everyone within the army, the moments of rest in between, that's when it chooses to throw in its humor. It would have been really jarring if during the confrontation between Shin and one of the generals that he all of a sudden cracks a joke, like on some Marvel BS. So I'm really happy Kingdom doesn't do that. Again, it's fine if other series choose to do so, but Kingdom can get extremely dark and bleak, and it would just be very jarring for those moments. But if there was a way to put Coalition into words, I think it's the ultimate demonstration of what Kingdom is about and capable of, which is everything I've pretty much been talking about for the last 9 minutes. Now, from this point onwards is where I think some of the Kingdom fans might start getting a tad bit nervous, because not only is this where I pretty much stopped reading since years ago, but also because this is usually the turning point for a lot of readers as well. As typical with many stories, after its best arc, people tend to say it falls off. Personally, I've never been a big fan of seriously using that, because it's sort of indicative that the series had this tremendous drop-off in quality and it's no longer what this series once was, and I just think that's I don't know. I feel like that's just a really weird way to say you just weren't as intrigued anymore. I feel like it's greatly exaggerated, but besides the point. After this, it's really how do you follow up after Coalition? And I think for the most part, I still really love Kingdom after Coalition arc a lot. It takes time, again, to give us, as I mentioned earlier, with Kyokai, and we get to see her character. And again, it goes from this super large conflict to a more personal one. And then from that point onwards, it enters the more political realm. So after this large, grandiose issue within the Coalition arc, we're once again brought into a more personal vicinity within not only specific characters, but the state of Chin once again. And this time we enter a more political realm within the conflict of Sei and his own mother. So again, despite the heavy politics that ends up happening within the State of I arc, and so as for the sentiment that Kingdom falls off after Coalition, I would greatly disagree, and I would just point to State of I. It's something that is far more personal, and I think one that emotionally managed to captivate me greatly and stayed very, very tense nonetheless, just for very different reasons than Coalition. And I wouldn't really call it a breather, but if we had gone from Coalition to something even grander and larger, I think at that point we would have just kind of all gotten lost in all of it, and it would have all bled and blurred together. And so having us being pulled away from this, and if not now more focused on Sei and a huge test for his character, was very well timed. And so the growth of Shin and Sei we see sort of parallel, and not only just those two, but Shin is also given competition in terms of wanting to rise up and become a general with two other characters, being Malten and Uohan, who are striving for the same thing as Shin, and eventually when the 6 great generals get reinstated, the spots for one of the great generals is going to end up being open, and so we all know what they're striving for. Although I think later, as the series continues, there's been a character introduced that I think will serve as a sort of rival for Shin, but from one of the other kingdoms, to keep his character pushing further and further and further. Because at this point, and this is when we can get into the current stuff, I'm really interested to see what will come next to test Shin further as a character. Because for those of you that are caught up, we all know what he's dealt with. As well as, man, I'm not going to lie, this whole thing with Riboku and the state of Zhao has been it's not bad. Let me just say that it hasn't been bad. Largely for me, everything with Kanki's character has made it somewhat worth it, but it has been very long. Coalition was like 100 chapters. Everything regarding Zhao and invading it has been over 300 chapters now. It's been going on since like 2016, 2017? Again, I think all of this has been great, and it's shown great steps forward with what Sei wants to accomplish. Although if you wanted to argue that it's been a bit drawn out, and because of that you've lost interest, I really wouldn't blame you. Because, man, this has been going on for a very long time, and even throughout reading it, it was like, wow, there's more? It goes to show how much of a threat Zhao is, and they've been built up since very early on within the story, especially Riboku himself, so it's good that we get to see how much of a legitimate monumental threat the people on the state of Zhao are. I'm a little concerned as if to after this point, because if people felt like after Coalition the series didn't feel the same, I mean, what sort of threat can you really present to them, to the state of Chin, to really make it feel justified? Because up to this point, by the way, spoiler warning, Shin has killed Hoken. Now, mind you, he didn't, like, solo the guy. Kyokai helped right before. But it's going to be very hard for me to believe that just some massive threats are going to appear again that feel more well built up than a character like Riboku and the entire state of Zhao has, who's been a thorn in the side of Chin throughout this entire story up to this point. And so, again, maybe it's just me needing to be patient with the series, but being 700 plus chapters in, it does feel like there's a lot of work still that needs to be done. Again, I don't think anything regarding the entire Zhao invasion has been bad. I think it's something that has continued to build off of what we've had previously more and more and more as the stakes are higher and higher. It just feels a little drawn out, and so I would say catching up to Kingdom is totally worth it, but I don't know when I'm going to pick this up or read it again. Yeah, I'm probably going to have to wait a few years for chapters to stack up, as I think Kingdom is an amazing series to read through in bulk. Going through it week to week during this arc, I don't know. I don't have that perspective, but I can imagine it it wasn't the most pleasant experience, maybe for some. Overall, I think Kingdom is a pretty much one-of-a-kind experience that you can sort of get pieces of from other places, but this mix of having these overlapping build-ups with payoffs of so many different characters, a great execution of getting you immersed into the world and building on top of it more and more and more in a way that all feels connected and nothing really feels like it's coming out of nowhere. A way of getting you in love with so many characters, and not just the main ones, but the side characters are each given their moments to shine, and all of the different thematic importances that pertaining war and growth within war really makes it one of the more inspirational reads out there. I think Kingdom is for anyone who loves action, but it's not a series of only action without substance. I think it's the perfect blend of the two. So finally, after 3 years, I did what I promised I would, and I caught up to Kingdom. Now I gotta go back to catching up to Yusugoi. Peace.